was 5 years old the day I walked up to a stranger in a grocery store and asked him to save my mother. I didn't know his name. I didn't know why his face made my heart beat faster. And I definitely didn't know that one sentence, one small, shaking sentence from a little boy clutching a toy car, was about to change 3 lives forever. All I knew was that my mom was scared. And when you're 5, fear looks very simple. It looks like your mother smiling when she doesn't want to. It looks like her shoulders going stiff. It looks like a man standing too close. It looks like her saying, "We're leaving now," in that voice adults use when they want everything to seem normal, even when it isn't. But before I tell you what happened in that store, you need to understand something about my mother. When I was little, I thought she could do everything. She could carry grocery bags in one hand and me in the other. She could fix a broken zipper with a safety pin, make pancakes shaped like stars, and somehow know when I was pretending to be asleep just so she'd carry me from the couch to bed. She worked hard, harder than anybody I knew. We lived in a small apartment with thin walls and a window that rattled every time trucks passed outside. The kitchen was tiny. The couch had one spring that pushed up in the middle. In the winter, the heater made strange clicking sounds before it finally gave in and warmed the room. But to me, it was home because she was in it. Back then, our world felt small in a good way. There was me. There was my mom. There was breakfast by the window on Saturdays. There were library books stacked beside the bed. There was the smell of laundry detergent on her sweaters. And then there was the question I wasn't supposed to ask too much. Do I have a dad? Kids ask things more than once. Not because they want to annoy you, but because they know there's a door somewhere and they can feel it, even if it's closed. Every time I asked, my mother would pause, just for a second. That second told me everything, even if I didn't understand it then. Sometimes she'd smile and brush my hair back and say, "You have me." Sometimes she'd kiss my forehead and say, "That's enough for now." Once, when I was 4, I asked if my dad had died. She looked so startled, she dropped the spoon she was holding. "No," she said quickly. "No, he didn't die." "Then where is he?" She didn't answer right away. She just knelt down in front of me, held my little face in both hands, and said something I remembered for years before I understood it. "Sometimes grown-ups lose each other," she said softly, "and sometimes they don't know how to find their way back." At 5 years old, that didn't make much sense. How do you lose a person? You could lose keys, you could lose one shoe under the bed, you could lose crayons in the couch cushions, but a whole person, that felt impossible. So I imagined my father as a blurry shape, someone out there somewhere, standing in a place with lots of roads, unable to read the signs. I didn't hate him. I couldn't. I didn't know him, but I thought about him more than I let on, especially when I saw fathers doing ordinary things, kneeling to tie a child's shoes, holding a bike steady while their kid learned to balance, lifting a sleepy daughter into a shopping cart. I didn't cry about it, not usually. I just watched and wondered what it might feel like if someone looked at me that way, like I belonged to them, like they had always known I was there. My mother noticed everything, even when I thought she didn't. That was one of her quiet talents. She could read a room, a bill, a bus schedule, and my face all within the same minute. So when I stared too long at other families, she'd squeeze my hand and distract me with something small. A joke, a snack, a race to the crosswalk, a made-up story. She never let me sit in sadness for too long. But sometimes, late at night, when she thought I was sleeping, I'd hear her moving around the apartment slower than usual. The dishes would take longer. The floorboards would creak back and forth by the kitchen window. And once, I heard her crying so quietly that if I hadn't been awake, I wouldn't have known. I stayed still, not because I was afraid, because even as a child, I understood that my mother carried things she didn't want me to carry too. That was our life before the grocery store. Simple, warm, a little lonely in ways neither of us knew how to name. And then came that Saturday, the day of apples and cereal and paper towels. The day I met the man who would rearrange everything I thought I knew about myself. It was raining that afternoon. Not hard, just enough to make the parking lot shine. I remember because my mother was holding my hand while trying to keep a grocery list dry beneath the sleeve of her coat. I was wearing rain boots with little yellow stripes, and I kept stepping in shallow puddles because the sound made me laugh. Inside the store, everything looked bright and polished the way grocery stores always do. Rows of fruit misted with water, fluorescent lights overhead, music so soft you didn't really hear it unless the world around you went quiet. We were in the produce section when it started. I didn't know the man. I had seen him once before, I think outside our building. But children notice patterns before they understand danger. What I knew was this when he appeared. My mother changed. Her spine stiffened. Her voice became thin. Her hand squeezed mine too hard. He was smiling, but not kindly. Some smiles aren't smiles at all. They're a way of showing teeth without making noise. Still avoiding my calls, he asked her. She took a small step back. This is not the place. That's funny, he said. You keep saying that everywhere. I looked up at my mother. Mom. She glanced down at me immediately. And in that split second, her expression softened. It's okay. Sweetheart. That's what adults say when things are not okay. I know that now. He looked at me then, not warmly, more like I was an inconvenience. Is this him? He asked. I didn't understand the question. My mother did. Her voice dropped low. Do not talk about him. People were moving around us with carts and baskets, passing by as if nothing unusual was happening. That's another thing about uncomfortable moments in public. Sometimes they happen inside invisible walls. Everyone nearby sees enough to know something is off, but not enough to step in. He leaned closer, too close. My mother shifted again, trying to block me with her body. I've been patient, he said. No, she replied quietly. You've been persistent. There's a difference. He laughed like she had said something cute, and for the first time in my life, I saw something in my mother that scared me more than his voice. Not anger, not panic, exhaustion, the kind that comes from fighting the same battle too long. She turned to me and said, Baby, go stand by the cart. That's when I knew it was serious. She never sent me away unless she needed both hands for something. I walked to the cart, but I didn't go far. I could still see them through a display of oranges. My mother was trying to stay calm. The man kept stepping forward every time she stepped back. He wasn't yelling. He didn't need to. Control doesn't always sound loud. Then I heard him say, You can't keep pretending forever. And I heard my mother say, Leave us alone. Us. That word lodged in me. Leave us alone. I looked around, and that was when I saw him. The stranger. He stood near the end of the aisle beside a tall woman with silver in her dark hair and a beautiful coat, the color of winter cream. He was holding a basket with coffee, bread, and flowers in it, which was such an odd combination that I remember it to this day. He looked out of place in the grocery store, not in a bad way, just too still, too put together, like someone from television had wandered into our ordinary afternoon by mistake. He wore a dark coat, no tie, and the kind of watch even children notice because it catches light. But what made me stop wasn't his clothes. It was his face. For one impossible second, I had the strangest feeling I had seen him before. Not exactly seen, more like recognized. That doesn't make sense. I know, but memory isn't always rational. And children live in instinct more than language. The woman beside him was saying something, smiling up at him. He was half listening. His attention had drifted toward the produce section, toward us, toward my mother, toward me. I don't know what made me move. Maybe it was desperation. Maybe it was that children can sense safe people faster than adults think. Maybe it was fate. If you believe in that kind of thing. I let go of the cart and ran. I ran straight up to him, tugged on the sleeve of his coat, and looked up with my whole chest thudding against my ribs. Mister, I said, my voice shaking. Can you help my mom? Everything changed after that. The stranger looked down at me, not annoyed, not confused, alert. He crouched immediately, bringing himself to my level, the way people do when they know children deserve full attention. What happened? He asked. His voice was low and calm, and something about it made me want to cry. Though I didn't. That man, I said, pointing. He won't leave her alone. The woman beside him had already turned. Her expression sharpened in an instant. The stranger followed my hand and saw my mother, and I watched something pass through his face so quickly I only understood it years later. Shock. Not because a woman was being cornered, because it was her. He stood. No hesitation. No dramatic pause. Just a quiet, immediate decision. He handed the basket to the older woman and walked with purpose toward the produce section, with me hurrying beside him in little uneven steps. My mother saw us coming and froze. The other man turned too, annoyed at first, then wary. "Is there a problem?" the stranger asked. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Some people enter a moment and change its temperature. He was one of those people. "This doesn't concern you," the man said. The stranger's gaze flicked once to my mother. "It concerns me if someone is clearly uncomfortable." My mother opened her mouth, but no words came out. She was staring at him like she had seen a ghost. The man trying to pressure her gave a dry laugh. "And who are you supposed to be?" The stranger answered without looking away. "Someone asking you to step back." Something in his tone made the distance feel non-negotiable. The man glanced around, probably noticing for the first time that more eyes had started to turn our way. Public scenes only stay invisible until someone makes them visible. The stranger had done that simply by standing there. My mother found her voice first. "We're leaving," she said. The stranger turned slightly toward her, enough to let her know the next move was hers. The other man looked furious, but also calculating. Men like that only enjoy pressure when they control the outcome. "This isn't over," he muttered. Then he walked away. Just like that. I remember the relief in my body arriving all at once. So fast my knees felt weak. I ran back to my mother and wrapped myself around her leg. She put one hand on my head, but her eyes were still on the stranger. Neither of them spoke, and even at 5, I could tell that silence wasn't ordinary. The older woman reached us then, elegant and composed, though something about her expression had gone soft when she looked at me. Very soft. The kind of look grandmothers in parks sometimes gave me when I shared crackers with pigeons. Except this was different. She stared at my face like she was looking at a photograph from long ago. The stranger noticed her looking. Then he looked at me again. Really looked. At my eyes, my hair, the shape of my mouth. I didn't understand why the air had suddenly become so strange. My mother recovered first. "Thank you," she said, her voice tight. "You didn't have to do that." The stranger's answer came after a beat. "Yes," he said quietly. "I did." Her eyes widened. That line meant something. I could feel it, even if I didn't know how. The older woman stepped forward and smiled at me. "What's your name?" "Sweetheart." I glanced up at my mother for permission. She hesitated, only a second, but I felt it. Then she nodded. I told the woman my name. Her lips parted. She turned to the stranger so fast it almost looked like pain had passed through her. He didn't say anything, but he hadn't blinked. The 4 adults we had been a moment ago were gone. Now there was me, my mother, a stranger with storm clouds in his eyes, and a woman who looked like she had just found something she'd been grieving for years. My mother gathered herself like someone pulling a coat closed in the wind. "We should go." The stranger nodded, but not before asking, "Are you safe?" Such a simple question, but it was the first time I had ever heard anyone ask my mother that. Not, "Are you okay?" People ask that when they want you to say yes. He asked, "Are you safe?" My mother swallowed. "Yes." He watched her for one more second, like he wasn't sure he believed it. Then she took my hand, thanked them again, and led me away. I looked back over my shoulder. The older woman was still staring at me, and the stranger was staring at both of us, as though his life had split in two and he had just realized it. That should have been the end of it. That should have been one strange day in a grocery store that became a story my mother and I told later over dinner. But on the way home, she was so quiet that even I stopped talking. And my mother was never quiet for no reason. In the apartment, she unpacked groceries without really seeing them. The milk went in the cabinet before I reminded her it belonged in the fridge. She dropped a tomato. She forgot the oven mitt and burned her fingers slightly, pulling a tray from the toaster oven. "Mom, I'm okay." Again that phrase. I climbed onto a kitchen chair and watched her. "Do you know that man?" Her back went still. For 3 seconds. 4. Then she turned and said, "Why would you ask that?" Because I was 5. Not foolish. Because people don't look at strangers the way she had looked at him. Because he had looked at me like a person waking from a dream they didn't know they were dreaming. Because the air between them had felt crowded with things unsaid. "You look like this," I said, making a ridiculous wide-eyed face and dropping my mouth open. To my surprise, she laughed, a short, startled laugh that sounded almost like it had escaped by accident. Then she sat down across from me and took both my hands in hers. "Listen to me," she said gently. "You did a very brave thing today." I was scared. I know. Brave doesn't mean not scared. I thought about that. Then I asked the question again. "Did you know him?" Her thumb moved over my knuckles. "A long time ago," she said. "Was he your friend?" Something sad and beautiful crossed her face. "Yes," she said softly. "Once." That answer should have satisfied me. It didn't. Children feel gaps in stories, the way tongues find missing teeth. You can't stop returning to them. That night, after dinner, after bath time, after she tucked the blanket around me and kissed my forehead, I said, into the dark, "Is he my dad?" I didn't mean to say it. Or maybe I had been meaning to all along. My mother went perfectly still beside the bed. The hallway light behind her threw half her face into shadow. For a second, I thought she might tell me no. I thought she might say I was being silly or tired or imaginative. Instead, she sat on the edge of the mattress, and in a voice so quiet I almost missed it, she said, "Why would you think that I shrugged under the blanket?" Suddenly embarrassed, he looked at me. Weird. She let out a breath that could have been a laugh or a sob. Weird. Not bad weird, I said quickly, just like he knew me. Her hand moved to my hair. She smoothed it back the way she always did when I had a fever or a nightmare. "I don't know what happens next," she said. That wasn't an answer, but it was honest. And sometimes, honesty feels safer than comfort. I fell asleep thinking of dark eyes, a calm voice, and the way the stranger had crouched the moment I asked for help. The next week, he appeared again, not inside our lives, just near them. The first time, my mother and I were leaving the library when I saw a familiar black car parked across the street. He wasn't inside it. He was standing near the curb in a charcoal coat, hands in his pockets, looking like he had been waiting and wasn't sure he should have. My mother saw him too. For a second, she considered walking the other direction. I could tell. Then he stepped forward, but carefully, not enough to block us. "I'm sorry," he said. "I didn't want to surprise you. You already did," my mother replied. I looked between them. He glanced at me, and whatever sharpness had been in his face softened immediately. "Hi," he said. I hid behind my mother's coat and peeked out. "Hi." He smiled a little. And there it was again, that impossible feeling. Familiarity where there should have been none. "What are you doing here?" my mother asked. "I wanted to make sure you were all right." "We're fine." He nodded once. Then, after a pause, "Are you adults? Hear things inside questions? Children hear the question itself." My mother held his gaze. "What do you want?" He didn't answer quickly. That mattered. People with bad intentions usually speak too fast. "I want the truth," he said. Everything inside my mother's face changed. Not dramatically. Just enough that I suddenly felt like I shouldn't be there hearing this. She looked around the sidewalk, then down at me. "Go look at the fountain," she said. There was a small stone fountain outside the library plaza. I went, but not far. I'm not proud of what I did next. But most children eavesdrop when the adults they love start whispering. I heard fragments. 5 years. You disappeared. I heard you. That isn't what happened. Please don't do this here. Then something that made my whole body go cold. Is he mine? Silence. Even the fountain seemed louder. When I looked back, my mother's eyes were shining. She wasn't crying yet, but she was close. The stranger, no. The man stood very still, like the whole world depended on her answer, and he knew it. She said something too low for me to hear. Whatever it was, the blood drained from his face. He looked at me. Not hidden now. Not accidental. Directly. My heartbeat went wild. He took half a step back as if he had been struck by something invisible. Then he looked at my mother and whispered, "Why didn't you tell me? And even now, after everything, I still remember the way she answered. Not angry, not defensive, wounded, because I thought you didn't want us. That sentence stayed with me for the rest of my life. I didn't understand all of it then, but I understood enough. Us, not want us. The pieces were there, scattered around my little mind like puzzle edges I couldn't yet assemble. We left soon after. My mother didn't explain in the car. She didn't have to. I knew the answer before she gave it. Still, after dinner, I climbed onto the couch beside her and leaned into her shoulder. Was that my dad? I asked. She closed her eyes. Then she opened them and nodded. Yes, there it was. One word. A whole new universe. I didn't jump up. I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I just sat there very still, hearing the rain tap the window, feeling her arm around me, and trying to fit the invisible shape of Dad onto the real face of a man in a charcoal coat. He didn't know, I asked. No. Why? She swallowed hard. Because I left before he could know. That made less sense to me than anything else. Why would you do that? She looked at me for a long moment, choosing her truth the way careful people do. Because I was hurt, she said, and because sometimes when people think they've heard something terrible, they run before they can be hurt more. I frowned. What terrible thing? She looked toward the window. And then, in quiet pieces, she began telling me a story. Not the whole story. Not yet. Just enough. Years before I was born, she had met a man at a conference. I didn't really know what a conference was, so I imagined a giant room where everyone wore name tags and talked about boring things while eating tiny sandwiches. She laughed a little when I said that, but her laugh faded quickly. She told me they had spent one evening talking longer than they intended, that something about him felt easy in a way nothing else in her life did. That one night turned into something she carried in her heart long after dawn. The next morning, she heard him say words that shattered her, words that sounded like rejection, cruelty, disgust. She left without letting him explain. Weeks later, she discovered she was pregnant. By then, the hurt had hardened into something she called certainty. So she chose me. She chose to raise me alone. She never contacted him. I listened with a child's simple logic. You were mad. She smiled sadly. Yes. And scared. Yes. And then too much time passed. Her eyes filled. Yes. I pressed my cheek against her arm. Did you love him? She stared at the wall for so long, I thought she wouldn't answer. Then she said, I never forgot him. At 5. That sounded close enough to love. Maybe it still is. A few days later, he came to our apartment building. Not upstairs. He stayed outside. My mother saw him from the window and closed her eyes like she had expected this and still wasn't ready for it. He's not coming in, she told me. Okay. He asked if he could speak to me. Okay. I told him I would come down for 10 minutes. That made me nervous for reasons I couldn't name. Are you mad? No. Are you sad? She looked at me, and one corner of her mouth lifted. Maybe. I thought about that. Then I asked, can I come? She hesitated. Then she said, you can sit in the lobby and color. You don't have to talk to him unless you want to. The lobby of our building smelled like old carpet and winter air. I sat at the low table with a box of crayons and pretended to draw a spaceship while listening to the rise and fall of voices near the front entrance. My mother stood with her arms folded. He stood in front of her. Not too close. That mattered to me. Even then, I noticed respect in distance. At one point, his voice cracked slightly. At another, my mother covered her mouth with her hand and turned away. Then I heard him say, clearly this time, I never said I didn't want you. My crayon stopped moving. I heard you, my mother whispered. He shook his head. You heard one sentence out of context. I was talking to someone else about a business arrangement. I didn't even know you were there. Silence. Then I looked for you, he said. That part surprised her. I could see it even from across the room. What I looked for you after you left. I went back. Your room was empty. The conference registration listed only your first name. I spent months trying to find you. My mother's face changed then. Not because everything was fixed, because something in her pain had just lost its foundation. If the story she had built her survival on was wrong, then what I didn't understand all that. Of course, but I understood the feeling of a room when truth arrives. It's like a glass sound inside your chest. Sharp, clear, and possible to ignore. He said more after that. But the sentence I remember most is this: "You should have had the choice to tell me no with the whole truth in front of you." I should have had the chance to know. My mother cried then, not loudly. The kind of crying that looks more like surrender than noise. I had never seen him touch her before. But he didn't then either. He kept his hands at his sides, letting her have space, even in her grief. That also mattered. A man who wants to be forgiven too quickly usually reaches too soon. He didn't. When they finished talking, my mother came over and knelt beside me. Her eyelashes were wet. "We're going upstairs now," she said. I nodded. Then I surprised both of us by asking, "Is he coming back?" She looked over at him. He was standing by the door, waiting without intruding, like he would leave the moment she asked. "Yes," she said quietly. "I think he is." That was the beginning. Not the healing, not the family, just the beginning of truth. His name was Daniel. I learned that 2 days later when he brought a puzzle for me and flowers for my mother and stood outside our door looking more nervous than any billionaire should ever look. I didn't know he was a billionaire then. By the way, to me, he was just the man with the calm voice, the sad eyes, and the funny inability to know what kind of toy a 5-year-old actually liked. The puzzle had 1,000 pieces. 1,000. For a child. My mother actually laughed when she saw it, a little advanced. "Don't you think Daniel looked at the box?" Then at me. Then back at the box. I panicked. That was the first time I saw my mother smile at him, without defense in it. "Come in," she said. The apartment seemed smaller with him inside. Not because he was large, because he carried a different world in with him. His coat alone probably cost more than our monthly rent. But the strange thing was, none of that was what stayed with me. What stayed with me was how careful he was. He wiped his shoes at the mat without being asked. He took the chair with the broken leg because my mother always avoided it, and he noticed. He thanked her for tea like it mattered. And when he spoke to me, he did not use that high, silly voice some adults use with children when they think small means stupid. "So," he said, nodding at my toy cars lined up on the rug. "Which one wins the most races?" I narrowed my eyes suspiciously. "The red one." "Good choice," he said. "Red cars should always have confidence." I liked that answer. Not enough to trust him yet, but enough to remember it. The next few weeks unfolded slowly. That is important. He did not arrive and become my father in a montage of sunshine and park benches. Real life is slower. Children are slower. Trust is slower. He began by asking permission for everything. "Can I visit? Can I bring him a book? Can I take you both to lunch? Can I call? Can I help? Can I come by after work?" He asked my mother. He asked me too. That part surprised me most. Adults usually make plans around children, not with them. But Daniel crouched to my level and said things like, "Would you like that? And is that okay with you?" At first, I said I don't know a lot. It was my safest answer. I didn't know what fathers were supposed to feel like. I didn't know whether to call him Daniel or Sir or nothing at all. I didn't know whether liking him would hurt my mother somehow. Like I was moving too fast into a story she hadn't finished surviving. So I watched. That is what children do when love enters the room, wearing a stranger's face. We watch, and Daniel gave me many things to watch. He arrived on time. Every time. If he said 4 o'clock, he was there at 4. If work delayed him, he called, not my mother, me. He'd say, "I'm sorry. I'll be 15 minutes late." And I know that matters. Imagine being 5 and hearing a grown man say your time mattered. That gets into your bones. The first place we went together was not some grand estate or luxury adventure. It was the park 3 blocks away because my mother said that was enough. Daniel brought a soccer ball that still had the store tag hidden in his coat pocket. He kicked too hard at first and sent it rolling into a bush. I laughed so hard I fell down. He put a hand over his heart and said, "I deserve that." That day, I saw something new in my mother too. Not happiness, exactly. Something more fragile. Hope with the lid still half closed. She sat on a bench with coffee while we played. Every few minutes, Daniel looked toward her. Not to make sure she was watching him, but to make sure she was comfortable. He never pushed for more than she could give. And because he didn't push, she didn't run. That was the rhythm of those early months. He entered our life like a man walking onto frozen water, testing every step, aware of the cracks beneath. He helped with small things. When the kitchen faucet started leaking, he offered to send someone. My mother said no, so he showed up with a toolbox and an old t-shirt under his coat and spent 40 minutes under the sink, muttering words I was probably not supposed to learn. When he emerged, damp and triumphant, I said, "Did you fix it?" He grinned. Either I fixed it or I made it worse, in a very confident way. He had already fixed it. My mother tried not to smile. He brought books because he noticed I loved them. Not flashy gifts, not expensive electronics. Books, dinosaurs, space, whales, a picture atlas with fold-out maps I studied until the corners curled. He seemed to understand instinctively that love is credible in the details. Anyone can make a grand entrance. The people who change your life usually do it by remembering what kind of cereal you like and how you always leave the blue crayon uncapped. Once, I got sick with a fever that hit fast and hard. My mother had to work a half shift she couldn't afford to miss. She was pacing by the couch, phone in hand, torn in that awful single-parent way between income and care. "I'll stay," Daniel said. She looked up immediately. "You don't have to." I know. There was a whole conversation in their eyes. Trust, fear, need, pride. Finally, she nodded once. That afternoon is one of my clearest memories. I was curled under a blanket, sweating and miserable. And Daniel sat on the floor beside the couch, in rolled-up sleeves, reading to me from a children's adventure novel in a voice that somehow made every chapter sound important. When I fell asleep, I woke later to find him still there, answering emails on his phone with one hand while holding a cool cloth to my forehead with the other. He did not act inconvenienced. He did not check out emotionally because the work was ordinary and unglamorous. He stayed. For a child, that is everything. Stay. You can build a whole father from that word. As time passed, I learned things about him in fragments. He ran a company. People recognized him in places. His apartment, when my mother finally agreed to let him pick us up once for dinner, was bigger than our entire building floor and had windows that made the city look like a sea of stars. I should have been impressed by the size of it, and I was. A little, but the thing I remember most was that he looked nervous, showing it to us. As if he was afraid it would feel like a trick, as if wealth was not an offering, but an obstacle. My mother felt it too. She walked through those beautiful rooms with her shoulders tight, not dazzled, guarded. Daniel noticed. He always noticed, so instead of showing off anything expensive, he took me straight to the corner of the living room, where there was a low shelf with puzzles, books, and a tiny telescope pointed toward the glass. I asked someone what 5-year-olds like. He admitted. "Who, my assistant? She has twins." She said books were safer than drums. I laughed. My mother did too. And suddenly the room felt less like a palace and more like a home, trying very hard to be gentle. The telescope became our thing, every time we visited. Daniel and I looked for the moon. He taught me words like orbit and crescent and horizon. He never acted like my questions were silly, even when they absolutely were. "Can birds get tired of flying?" "Yes." "How do you know?" "Because I get tired of meetings." "Are meetings like flying?" "Only if you're trapped in them." I adored him a little for that, which scared me, because love, when it grows quickly in a child, comes with terror in its shadow. What if he left? What if my mother changed her mind? What if this was temporary? Like those holiday displays in stores that vanish overnight and leave you wondering if they were ever really there. I didn't say these fears out loud. Children rarely do. We test instead. One evening, while Daniel was helping me build a cardboard rocket from a kit he had brought over, I deliberately snapped a part in half. Not by accident. On purpose. I wanted to see what kind of man he was when plans broke. He looked at the ruined cardboard fin. Then at me. I braced for disappointment. Instead, he said, "Well, now we have 2 options." My eyes narrowed. "What options?" "We fix it," he said. "Or we decide this is a battle scar and our rocket has a cooler story than the others." I stared at him for a long moment. Then I whispered, Battle scar. He nodded solemnly. Excellent. Every respectable spacecraft needs one. That night, when my mother tucked me in, I asked, "Do you think he gets mad at kids?" She sat on the edge of the bed. Sometimes. Probably. Everybody gets frustrated, but not mean mad. She was quiet for a moment. "No," she said, "not mean." I turned onto my side, relieved in a way too deep for my age. "Mom, yes. Do you still love him?" There was a long pause. Then, that isn't a switch you turn on and off. I thought about that until I fell asleep. Months passed, and Daniel became woven into our days. He helped me with letters when I was learning to write them neatly. He taught me to fold paper airplanes that actually flew instead of diving nose first into furniture. He came to a preschool activity dressed in an expensive coat and sat on a tiny chair meant for children, knees bent awkwardly, while gluing cotton balls onto construction paper, because I wanted my sheep to be extra fluffy. When the teacher asked if he was my father, he looked at my mother before answering. My mother looked at me. I said nothing. So Daniel smiled and simply said, "I'm very important to him." It was the perfect answer. No pressure, no claiming, just presence. That was his gift. He never tried to force the title before I was ready to give it. And still, life was not suddenly simple. Adults carry history into every room. Love does not erase the years it lost. There was still hard conversations. I knew because sometimes when he stayed after I went to bed, I'd wake for water and hear low voices in the kitchen. Not fighting, but not easy either. My mother asking questions she had every right to ask. Why didn't you move on? Why are you doing this now? What happens when work takes over? What if he gets attached and this falls apart? What if I do? Daniel never answered carelessly. I know that because my mother's trust came back slowly, like light at dawn, not all at once. One night I heard him say, "I am not asking you to forgive the years. I am asking you to let me earn the ones ahead." That sentence lived in our apartment for days after. Even I could feel it. He wasn't promising perfection. He was promising effort. And effort is believable. Around the same time, I learned more about the man from the grocery store, the one who had cornered my mother. He wasn't a boyfriend or some secret from the present, the way my childish imagination had first feared. He was connected to a problem at her job. Someone who had mistaken persistence for entitlement and politeness for invitation. My mother had been handling it quietly, trying not to bring that stress home. Daniel found out more than I did. Of course, and while he respected my mother's wish not to turn it into drama, he did insist she document everything and helped connect her with legal support through someone he trusted. What mattered to me was simpler. After that, my mother slept better. She smiled more easily. The tightness around her eyes began to fade. I didn't realize how much fear she had been carrying until it started to leave. That is another truth. Children know before they can explain it. We feel the weight our parents think they've hidden, and we feel the relief when someone finally helps them set it down. The emotional shift in our home was subtle at first. Music in the kitchen again. Her humming while folding laundry. Laughter that didn't end too quickly. The first time I saw Daniel make her genuinely laugh, head tipped back, eyes bright, hand over her mouth like she couldn't contain it. I was so startled I laughed too, even though I hadn't heard the joke. There are sounds children never forget. A mother's real laughter is one of them. Still, even beautiful things can terrify you when you've wanted them too long. The first time, Daniel missed one of our Saturdays. I spiraled. He called that morning. There had been an emergency with investors in another city. He would be back the next day. He sounded sincere. My mother believed him. I did not. Or maybe I did. But fear was louder. All day I was quiet and difficult. I said I didn't care. I kicked my shoes off angrily. I refused lunch. When my mother asked what was wrong, I shouted, "Nothing." Which, of course, meant everything. That evening, I sat by the window, waiting for headlights that never came. My mother joined me on the floor. "Do you want to tell me?" I whispered. "What if he doesn't come back?" She didn't rush to deny it. That is how I knew she respected my feelings. Instead, she said, "Then it will hurt, but we will be okay." I shook my head hard. "I don't want okay." Her eyes softened. and for a moment she looked not like my mother but like a woman remembering her own younger heartbreak. "I know," she said. The next day, Daniel came straight from the airport in yesterday's clothes and knocked on our door with tired eyes and no pretense. I didn't go to him. I stayed on the couch with my arms folded. He took one look at me and understood. "I'm late," he said. "You're a whole day late." "I am," you said, "Saturday." "I know." I expected excuses. Instead, he came closer, crouched down, and said, "You were counting on me. I'm sorry." I didn't unfold my arms. He nodded, as if I had every right. Then, he pulled something from his coat pocket. A boarding pass. He held it out to me. Not because a child needs travel documentation, because even then, he knew proof matters when trust is young. "I left the meeting as soon as I could," he said. "I came straight here." I looked at the paper, then at him. His face was exhausted. Real. No performance. Very quietly, I asked, "You came straight here, yes?" Something unclenched in me. Not all at once, but enough. I slid off the couch and stood there awkwardly. He opened his arms a little, not all the way. Just enough to offer. And that was the first time I hugged him. He held me like I was breakable and precious and more important than sleep. When he let go, my mother was standing in the kitchen doorway with one hand over her mouth. Later, when I was supposed to be coloring, I heard her say to him, "You didn't have to show him the boarding pass." He answered, Yes, I did." That became one of the truths of his love. He believed reassurance should be visible. As spring turned to summer, our lives began to braid together in ways even I could feel. Daniel came to my first little school presentation, where I had exactly one line to say and nearly forgot it because I saw him in the audience beside my mother. He was wearing a suit because he had come straight from work. But there he sat in a room full of paper suns and crooked artwork, applauding like I had just delivered a speech to the United Nations. Afterward, he knelt and said, "You were incredible." I forgot the middle part. "You recovered beautifully." What's recovered? It means you kept going. That night, I practiced the line again at dinner, just so he could clap a second time. He did, with the same sincerity, on hot afternoons. He took us for ice cream and let me choose outrageous flavors no adult should approve of. Mint with caramel swirl, blueberry cheesecake, a strange green thing with cookie pieces. Every time. My mother chose vanilla. Every time. Daniel pretended to be scandalized. "You are the most mysterious woman I know," he'd say. "How is vanilla mysterious? Because no one this complicated should order something this simple." She'd roll her eyes, but she smiled. Always smiled. One evening at the park, while I chased pigeons with the serious commitment only children bring to impossible missions, I heard Daniel say to my mother, "I love him." He said it quietly, not realizing I was close enough to hear. My steps slowed. My mother's answer came after a moment. "He loves you too," she whispered. I didn't run to them. I didn't say anything. But that night, lying in bed, I pressed my face into the pillow and grinned so hard my cheeks hurt. Because there are things every child deserves to overhear at least once. One of them is that they are loved. Yet love was not the only thing changing. My mother was changing too. For years, I think she had lived like a house with one room permanently locked. Not because she wanted to, because survival had taught her to. Daniel never demanded the key. He just kept proving he was safe outside the door. And one day, almost without warning, the door began to open. The first real sign came on an ordinary Thursday night. Power went out in our building during a storm. The whole apartment went dark except for the lightning beyond the window. I hated thunder back then. Pretended not to. But I did. Within 15 minutes, Daniel was at our door with flashlights, take-out soup, and a battery-powered lantern that made him look absurdly prepared for the apocalypse. "How did you know the power was out?" my mother asked. "You texted me a single period." She blinked. I did, yes. I took that as a cry for help. She laughed so hard she had to lean on the doorway. We ate soup by lantern light while thunder rolled outside. After dinner, Daniel and I built blanket forts in the living room. My mother sat inside with us eventually, knees tucked awkwardly beneath a quilt roof while rain drummed against the glass. At one point, lightning flashed, and instinctively, I moved closer to him. He wrapped an arm around me. Natural, easy, like he had always done it. Then my mother looked at both of us in that strange, softened way she had now. And without really thinking, she leaned in too. There we were, 3 people under a blanket fort in a dark apartment, lit by a lantern, sharing crackers and listening to storm sounds. It was one of the happiest moments of my childhood, not because it was dramatic, because it wasn't, because family, I would learn, often arrives quietly, not with declarations, with lanterns, with soup, with someone showing up when the lights go out. By the time summer ended, I no longer thought of Daniel as someone visiting our life. He was part of it, but I still hadn't called him Dad. Not because I didn't want to, because the word felt huge, holy, almost. A bridge once crossed that could never be uncrossed. I think he knew that. He never asked for it, never even hinted. If anyone else referred to him that way around me, he would gently redirect. Daniel is fine, he'd say, which only made me love him more. The climax came sooner than anyone expected. Not in a mansion, not in a boardroom, at a little birthday party. It was for a boy in my class named Ethan, who lived in a house with a swing set and a dog that stole hamburger buns off plates. There were balloons tied to the fence, paper cups with cartoon rockets on them, and one of those inflatable bounce houses that make children lose all sense of dignity. My mother and Daniel came together. That alone felt like a milestone to me. Not separate cars, not careful distance. Together. Daniel had brought a gift wrapped so neatly it looked like a museum exhibit. My mother had teased him about it all morning. Children notice pairings before adults admit them. I noticed the other boys were running around in superhero capes, provided by Ethan's mom. I had one too, bright red, dragging behind me like a promise. At one point, while we were eating cake, one of the boys pointed at Daniel, who was talking with a few parents nearby. "Is that your uncle?" he asked. "No." "Then who is he?" The table went louder around me all at once, paper plates scraping, juice boxes crinkling, someone laughing too hard, but inside me everything became very still, because for months I had been carrying a word in my chest, a word made of Saturdays and stories and telescope nights, of apologies that sounded real, of hands that stayed, of my mother smiling in the kitchen, of fever cloths and soccer balls and blanket forts, of a man who had not asked to be called father, but had become one anyway. I looked across the yard. Daniel happened to glance over at that exact moment. Our eyes met, and something in his expression warm, attentive, open told me I didn't need permission anymore. I stood up on the grass, cape sliding off one shoulder, and said it clearly. "That's my dad." The world did not stop. It just changed shape. The boys accepted this information with the easy indifference children reserve for major truths. One of them said, "Cool," and reached for another cupcake. But the adults heard. My mother turned first. Then Daniel. I will never forget his face. For a heartbeat, he looked as if he had not understood me. Then understanding hit. His entire expression broke open. Not polished, not controlled. Pure emotion. My mother's eyes filled instantly. Daniel crossed the yard. Not fast enough to frighten me. Not slow enough to hide what it meant. He stopped in front of me and crouched. "Can you say that again?" he asked. Voice rough. I suddenly felt shy, but I smiled. "You're my dad." He closed his eyes for 1 second like he needed to survive the feeling before he could answer. When he opened them, they were bright. "Yes," he said softly. "If you want me to be." I nodded. Then he pulled me into his arms and held on. People say children remember big moments in flashes. That's true. I remember the smell of grass, the warm fabric of his shirt, my mother crying and laughing at the same time, a paper plate flipping over in the wind, the distant squeal of the bounce house blower, and the strange certainty that something missing in me had just clicked into place. That night, after the party, the 3 of us went home instead of out. Nobody wanted to break the spell. Daniel cooked pasta in our tiny kitchen, while my mother sat on the counter pretending not to smile every time he got in her way. I sat at the table coloring a picture of the party. At one point, I heard my mother say quietly. "He chose that on his own." Daniel stopped stirring the sauce. I know. There was so much gratitude in those 2 words that even I felt it. Later, after I was in bed, I was not asleep. Children are rarely asleep as early as adults hope. I heard low voices in the living room, then silence. Then my mother laughed through tears. The next morning, she looked different, lighter, as if some last wall inside her had finally fallen. A week later, Daniel asked if he could take us somewhere special. My mother said yes. He drove us out of the city to a place by the water where the evening sky stretched so wide it made me quiet. There were little lights strung through trees, and the restaurant terrace overlooked a lake glazed gold by sunset. I thought it was the most beautiful place in the world. And for all his resources, Daniel still somehow managed to seem nervous. His hand kept brushing his pocket. My mother noticed too. By dessert, even I knew something was happening. He asked if we would walk with him down to the water. The 3 of us went. The air smelled like summer and clean earth. Crickets had begun their evening song. We stopped near a low wooden dock where the last of the sun shimmered on the lake. Daniel turned to my mother first. "I have loved you badly," he said. I frowned because that sounded terrible, but he continued, voice steady. Not because what I felt was small, because life, fear, misunderstanding, and time made a mess of what should have been simple. I cannot get back the years I didn't know. I cannot erase what you carried alone. But if you will let me, I want to spend the rest of my life loving you better than I lost you. My mother was crying before he finished. I looked between them, gripping the dock rail. Then, Daniel knelt. He didn't just look at her. He looked at me too. That mattered most. "I'm not asking for perfection," he said. "I'm asking for the chance to choose this family every day for the rest of my life." He opened a small box. Yes, there was a ring. Beautiful, sparkling. Everything rings in stories are supposed to be. But what I remember most is not the ring. It is my mother pressing her hand to her mouth like her heart had nowhere else to go, and then laughing softly through tears, and then saying, "Yes." I shouted before I even knew I was going to. She laughed harder. Daniel stood, slipped the ring onto her finger, and then she kissed him with one hand on his face, like she had wanted to do that for years and had finally stopped being afraid of joy. Then they both turned to me, and I did what any 5-year-old living inside a cinematic miracle would do. I demanded a group hug immediately. So we stood on that dock with the sun going down around us, wrapped around one another, while I kept saying, "We're really a family now," as if I needed to hear the words enough times for the universe to confirm them. The wedding was not huge. That would have been easy for Daniel. Easy is not the same as right. My mother wanted warm, not grand, real, not impressive. So they got married in a small garden courtyard with white flowers, soft music, and only the people who truly belonged there. I wore a tiny suit and hated the shoes. Daniel looked like every movie version of a groom, except more human, because he couldn't stop looking at my mother like he was astonished. She was walking toward him. She wore a simple dress that moved in the breeze. Nothing about it screamed money. Everything about it whispered grace. I walked part of the aisle with her because she asked me to. "Will you help me?" she said that morning while kneeling to fix my collar. "Help you what?" "Help me walk into our new life." I nodded, with all the seriousness available to a 6-year-old by then. So I did. When we reached Daniel, he took my mother's hand first, then mine, and for a brief second, before the ceremony began, the 3 of us stood in a line no force on earth could have pulled apart. During the vows, I was mostly focused on not fidgeting and on whether the cake would appear soon. But one part stayed with me forever. Daniel said, "Thank you for trusting me with your hearts. Not for loving me, not for choosing me, for trusting me." He understood what had been at stake all along. After the ceremony, people danced. My mother laughed. Daniel danced terribly on purpose, to make me laugh harder. His mother, by then very much my grandmother in all but paperwork, cried during dinner and kept touching my cheek as though she still couldn't believe I was real. She had embraced me long before the wedding. Of course, the 2nd or 3rd month after the grocery store, she invited us to tea. My mother was hesitant. I was not. There were cookies shaped like stars. That afternoon changed more than I realized then. She sat with me on the rug, looked through books, asked me questions about school, and listened to every answer as if it mattered. But at one point, when my mother stepped into the kitchen and Daniel took a call, she brushed my hair back from my forehead and whispered, almost to herself, "You look so much like him when he was little." I looked up at the framed photos on the shelf, and there he was, a young Daniel in a school uniform, serious-eyed and half-smiling. I stared. She smiled through sudden tears. "I knew the first moment I saw you." That made me feel less strange for having felt recognition, too. As if blood had somehow spoken before names did. After the wedding, life did not become perfect. That matters. Stories that end at "I do" often stop before the true beauty starts. But the beauty was in what came after. Ordinary days with more chairs at the table. Daniel moved carefully into our rhythms rather than uprooting them. We still kept the library Saturdays. We still had pancakes by the window. We still used our old couch, even after he offered 50 times to replace it. Because my mother said sentimental furniture deserves a decent retirement ceremony. He laughed and obeyed. Eventually, we moved to a larger home, but not at once. And not because he insisted. My mother wanted to choose it together. She wanted it to feel like ours, not his with space made for us. So we did. I remember walking through bright, empty rooms while my mother tested light in the kitchen, and Daniel checked whether there was space for bookshelves, and I ran from bedroom to bedroom, already planning impossible forts. When we found the right house, the first thing Daniel asked me was, "Which room gets the best moon view?" That became mine. Of course it did. Years later, when people asked when I really became his son, they expected a dramatic answer. The grocery store, the birthday party, the wedding. But love is rarely a single moment, even if some moments shine brighter. I became his son every time he showed up. Every fever, every recital, every scraped knee, every hard school morning, every time he apologized when he was wrong, every time he chose us when work could have pulled him elsewhere, every time he looked at my mother like the world had given him back something he never deserved to lose. And my mother became softer in happiness than I had ever seen her in survival. Not weaker, never that, just free. She stopped carrying the entire future in her shoulders. She slept through the night. She wore brighter colors. She planted herbs by the kitchen window and sang while cooking. She learned, slowly and bravely, that being loved well is not the same thing as being indebted, that she did not need to earn rest. That partnership did not mean surrender. That family could be built after fracture, not just before it. About a year after the wedding, I came home from school and found her standing in the kitchen with Daniel, both of them smiling in that secret way adults do when they think they are being subtle and are absolutely not. What I demanded. She laughed. "Come here." I did. Daniel crouched beside me, eyes bright. "You're going to be a big brother." For a second I just blinked. Then my first thought, embarrassingly, was, do I have to share the telescope? My second thought was joy so enormous, it made me bounce on my toes. A real baby. A very real baby. My mother said. I threw my arms around both of them at once. That night, I lay awake imagining tiny socks, soft baby hair, and all the serious responsibilities of older brotherhood. I also wondered if the baby would look like my mother, or Daniel, or maybe a little like both the way I did. When my little sister was born months later, Daniel placed her in my arms with the same reverence people use carrying candles into dark rooms. "Meet your sister," he whispered. She had the smallest fingers I had ever seen. My mother looked tired and radiant. Daniel looked overwhelmed in the gentlest way possible. And I looked at the three of them and thought something I was still too young to articulate properly. Love had come back for us. Not in the way stories promise with magic, in the way real life does. Through misunderstanding untangled, through pride softened, through courage repeated, through someone asking for help in aisle 7 beside the apples. You might think that after all that, the biggest lesson I learned would be about fate, about destiny, about how the right people find each other no matter what. But that's not actually what I believe, because people can lose each other. My mother was right about that. Years can disappear between hurt and healing. Silence can become a life. Misunderstandings can calcify into identity. So no, I don't think love alone is what brought us back together. I think love waited. And then when the moment finally came, people chose. I chose to tug on a stranger's sleeve. Daniel chose to step in. My mother chose, despite fear, not to run a second time. Daniel chose to stay without forcing. My mother chose to trust in increments. And later, each of us chose again and again. That is what built our family. Not perfection from the beginning. Construction over time. Board by board. Word by word. Stay by stay. I am older now. Old enough to understand the things 5-year-old me only felt. Old enough to know that my mother must have been terrified when she heard the truth about that old misunderstanding. Terrified to realize she had spent years punishing herself with a false story. Old enough to know Daniel must have grieved those lost years even while being grateful for every new one. Old enough to understand that adults are often just children with better coats and more complicated fears. But I still carry that little boy inside me. The one in yellow striped rain boots, standing in a grocery store under fluorescent lights. The one who knew only that his mother needed help and that something about a certain man felt safe. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I had stayed by the cart. If I had obeyed too well, if fear had made me smaller instead of brave, maybe eventually the truth would still have surfaced. Maybe not. Life turns on such tiny hinges. A tug on a sleeve. A question asked at bedtime. A man saying, "Are you safe?" instead of, "Are you fine?" A child saying, "That's my dad." Before anyone else dares to name what love has already become. People like happy endings because they feel rare. But I think we misunderstand them. A happy ending is not where pain never happened. It is where pain did not get the final word. So here is mine. The woman who once believed she had been abandoned learned she had been loved all along, just interrupted by misunderstanding and time. The man who once lost the woman he could not forget found her again in the unlikeliest place, standing beside the son he never knew existed. The little boy who used to watch other fathers in parks went home one day holding the hand of his own. And years later, when my sister was old enough to ask how our parents met, Daniel looked at my mother and said, "That's your brother's story to tell." So I told her about the rain, about the apples, about the man with the cruel smile, about the stranger with flowers in his basket, about the grandmother who knew before words did, about how brave doesn't mean not scared. And when I finished, my sister, who had Daniel's eyes and our mother's mouth, looked at me very seriously and asked, "So you basically rescued the whole family?" Everyone laughed, even me. But Daniel put a hand over his heart the way he still does when emotions sneak up on him. And he said, "Actually, yes, he did. Maybe that's too generous. Maybe all I really did was ask for help. But sometimes that is the bravest thing any of us can do. Ask, believe, stay." That is how families begin. Not always with certainty. Not always in the right order. Sometimes in the aftermath of a misunderstanding. Sometimes in a small apartment with thin walls. Sometimes under a blanket fort during a storm. And sometimes when the world is bright with grocery store lights and your mother is trying very hard not to look afraid. Family begins the moment a little boy lifts his hand, tugs the sleeve of a stranger, and says, "Mister, can you help my mom?"